Yeah, so this week we're going to talk about the different sampling methods that we are going to cover. We're not going to talk about all possible types of sampling methods, but we're going to talk about a few of the more common types of methods. We're going to first focus on what are considered good methods. So we'll talk about each method, and then I'll give you an example that demonstrates the difference between those three. So the first good method we're going to talk about is what's called a simple random sample. So the goal here is that you're going to start with a list of all elements in your population. So if you're looking at having all undergraduate students at NKU being your population, you're going to have a list of all those students. Then from there, you're going to randomly select n of them, and that will be your sample. So when you're thinking about what a simple random sample is, the best thing to really compare this to is the idea of it being a very big raffle. So there's like one ticket in there for each possible person in the population. You pull out so many of them, those are your winners. That is your sample. This is probably the easiest, most simplest of our methods that we're going to talk about. But the stratified sampling sort of bases upon that one. It just has a different first step. Still going to start with all elements in your population. So you still have to know who your population is. But from there, before we do any selecting, we're going to break them into groups. And these groups are going to be homogeneous, or are basically the same in some way. These different groups are what's called the strata. That's where the stratified sampling comes from. So for example, I might start with a list of all undergraduate students at NKU, and then I'm going to break them into their majors. So I'm going to have, here's, my business majors, here's my STEM majors, here's my computer science majors. So I'm going to break them into homogeneous groups, and I need to already know what that is. And then from there, I'm going to randomly choose some from each group. And the singular part of strata is stratum. So I'm going to say I'm going to select 10 computer science majors, 10 math majors, 10 marketing majors. So I'm going to kind of make sure I have some from each group. Right, the last good method we're going to talk about here is what's called a systematic sample. So again, you're going to start with all elements in your population. Then you're going to randomly choose the first one out of K. So I might say, well, out of the first 10, I'm going to randomly pick one of them. So, okay, I'm going to start with the third element. Then you're going to choose every kth thereafter. If I choose my first one being the third, then I might sample every 10th thereafter, and that will become my sample. Okay, so to kind of a quick explanation of each, now let's actually look at an example where I demonstrate the differences between them. I'm going to first by giving you a list of my population. I'm only doing this while you're watching since you're going to probably write them down too. And I'm also going to go ahead and assign them each a number. So I'm just going to list them in the order I have here. And let's suppose that for my simple random sample, my goal is to choose 6 people. Alright, so I'm going to use some type of like a random number generator to tell me to pick 6 numbers between 1 and 14. Right, I'm not going to select the same number more than once, that different type of idea. So my simple random sample, I use like a calculator just to randomly generate some numbers for me. Shows element 7, 12, 3, 1, 5, and 6. So then that's going to be who my sample is. So my sample then will be Mark, Bethany, Dave, Lisa, Jackie, and Carl. So that would be an example of just a simple random sample. Now a stratified random sample. A little bit different. So first I got to break these up into groups. So the names I chose here were a list of basically math and stat professors here at the university. So that's what the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break them in to my math and stat groups. So my stat people are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 14. And my math are the rest. And then from there, I decided to choose 2 from each group. So I gave my random number table these 6 numbers, said randomly choose 2 of these 6 numbers that I have, and they chose numbers 7 and number 3. And they asked them to do the same thing for the math, and they chose number 8 and number 12. So then my sample is Dave, Mark, Danielle, and Bethany. That would be that sample. So does that make sense? I mean, the difference here is, I mean, up here I could have picked all math professors, right? I could have. I didn't, but I could have here. Here I'm forced, and I'm going to make sure I get some of stat and some of math as I do that. Alright, last, let's talk about a systematic sample. The first one we're talking about here, to make sure we understand it, is what the K represents. So K kind of tells you how many elements do you want to start with. So if I want to pick one of the first 5, if I want to pick every 5th person, every 10th person, every 12th person, so that's the first thing I need to know. So let's suppose I'm going to do a K equal to 3. So I'm going to pick every 3rd person. So the first thing I got to do is just look at my first 3 people. And I need to figure out which of those 3 people is going to be my first person I sample. And I'm going to randomly choose that. So I'm going to randomly choose a number between 1 and 3. When I did that, I got the number 3. So then I can go here. So my first element I'm going to sample is Dave. So I'm going to get every 3rd. So 1, 2, 3. So samples Carl. 1, 2, 3. Kind of sample Mike. 1, 2, 3. and I'm going to sample Bethany. So there my sample will be Dave, Carl, Mike, and Bethany. So hopefully that makes a difference of what those 3 methods actually are. And so we've talked about some of the good sampling methods. We've talked about a few other sampling methods. Notice I didn't label them here as bad because they're not necessarily bad. Remember that big thing we talked about is the bias, right? So bias is an important thing that we need to pay attention to. So you can still do these other methods without having a strong bias in it, but just something to be much more aware of when we're doing it to make sure that they're not biased in how we're doing it. So a convenient sample is just what it sounds like. So we're going to simply sample those who are convenient. So some examples of what that would be. So for example, if I were to take a class poll, right, so I mean, it's very easy, it's very convenient for me to do that. I could stand outside the union, ask people questions. I was just kind of a couple of examples of what a convenient sample would be. Now what I need to worry about is what I'm asking to know if that's really a strong bias I need to be worried about. I mean, if I'm doing a class poll and I'm worried about, for example, major, that might be a little biased, like especially if I'm in a upper level stat class, because that's going to be full of more stat majors. Right, so it matters what I'm measuring if it's really going to be a strong bias attached to it. One of the other sampling methods we have to talk about is what's called a volunteer sample. So of course we just simply ask for volunteers. And even though that seems relatively simple, I want to make sure I have this be different than just what volunteer means. When it comes to any sampling method that we generally do, people still have to volunteer to give us their information, right? Like if I've chosen to be part of my sample, I send you a survey, you still have to actually choose to return that, right? So in a sense, you're still kind of volunteering to participate. And the volunteer sample is a little bit different. So with most other sampling methods, we seek out the people to be part of our sample. With the volunteer sample, it's the other way around. So the people seek us out. So we don't actually ask them to participate, in the sense they come to us to participate, if that makes sense. So some examples of that to understand that difference. A lot of times we use TV news polls, or even sometimes online, call in and give us your opinion on this, right? So we have to seek out to participate in that. Another great example that probably many of you have heard of or possibly used is there's a Rate My Professor website. So, right, you don't get asked to go out there and fill out evaluations on professors. You seek out to go to that place and give them your opinion on the Rate My Professor. Medical trials fall in this category. Of course, medical trials are much better because at least they are screened. Right, so participate in this study and receive $2,000 if you fit these certain conditions, right? So they have that. One of my favorites are those bumper stickers. If you've ever seen them, like how was my driving bumper stickers with a phone number to call attached to it. And so all of these are examples of volunteer samples. Some are better than others. Like a medical trial is probably going to be a very good trial. There's screening done to make sure they should participate in the study. Now, the other ones we could probably expect to get some bias. Like Rate My Professor, I kind of know who goes out there, right? Generally, it's students who have a very strong opinion, either very strong positive opinion or very strong negative opinion of the professor. But if you know that when you're going out there, that doesn't mean you can't get information from it, right? So I can figure out, well, okay, if they have 10 negatives for every one positive, that might be something that you need to worry about. right? So you can still get information when you realize what kind of people go out there to submit it. Or the how's my driving bumper sticker. I mean, let's be honest. You have this phone number to call. Who's calling? Is the person calling to say, ooh, best right turn ever? No, I mean, all people are going to call are the ones that probably got pissed off, cut off by the driver. So how can I get information from that? Well, something I could look at is how frequently do those calls come in? Like, right, I have one driver that's getting only 2 a month versus one who's getting 20 a month. So I can actually look at the frequency of those calls and still be able to get some useful information from what I have. As I make with my little note down here, there can be multiple ideas of sampling going on as well. So it doesn't have to necessarily fall just into one of these. A lot of times it'll overall fall into one, but we can actually make sure, I can do a convenient sample with a stratified sample at the same time. Right, I can stand outside the union and I'm going to make sure I sample 20 men and 20 women that walk by. Right, so since I'm doing the idea of a stratified sample attached to a convenient sample at the same time. Or I could sample every 20th person that walked by and be doing a systematic sample at the same time. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the methods out there. Again, keeping in mind some are better than others, but there are other ones out there than just the ones I've listed here as well.